You enjoyed the last chapter. It was pretty intense. Okay, so just a quick recap. Before Goethe has been pushing Anna away. She reached out to her to try to be friends again, and Goethe had to push her away for reasons of trust. And she didn't want to risk Anna being in trouble, I think. And then the big event was Officer Mueller catching Fritz and Goethe right in their tunnel, right underneath the death strip, and pulling his gun on them. What's going to happen? Okay. So they're still in the tunnel with Officer Mueller, okay? It felt like hours before any of us spoke. Mueller took his time investigating the tunnel, running his hands along the sides and poking at the ceiling to check how solid it was above us. A part of me hoped the ceiling would collapse directly above him, but of course that meant we'd be trapped too, and the death strip would cave in on all of us. Not much of a solution. "You've gone a long way," Mueller said, "farther than I expected." "You knew we were tunneling?" Fritz asked. "How?" "I knew there was a reason your sister didn't want me getting close to this building, but I didn't really become suspicious until I looked inside the basement yesterday. I saw the pulley and the bucket and asked myself why so much fresh dirt might be in a building that is supposed to be closed up. I could have kicked myself, or preferably kicked him. I knew he'd gotten close to the windows, but never thought he'd seen so much. In hindsight, meaning when you look back, that was plain stupidity on my part, just childish optimism in the face of reality. I want you to think about if it's easier to take risks when someone is younger. So when you're young and you don't know as much, is it easier to be optimistic, meaning you are always hoping and thinking things are going to turn out okay? And does that make risk easier? What do you think? Mueller ordered us out of the tunnel, but told us not to climb the ladder up to the surface. Fritz dropped the shovel handle, then walked first with his hands held high, and I followed. Mueller went last, keeping the gun trained on us. If he shot, I hoped he would get me first. Maybe that was selfish, but I didn't want to go through watching it happen to Fritz, knowing what I was next. Once we were in the shelter, Mueller ordered us to sit on the small bench. He stood beside the ladder, and here, under a little more light, I saw the gun all too well. "No trial is required before I shoot you," he said. "You are clearly guilty of attempting to leave the country." Yes, we were. Not even the best told lie could get us out of this one. "I was first alerted to you by a woman who lives in your building, Frau Eberhardt. Do you know her?" I knew her and suddenly loathed her just as much as I did Officer Mueller, which is a really strong word for hate. Loathe, it means that you really hate someone or something. Maybe that was unfair. The Stasi would give her much needed rewards in exchange for information, and after all, she was on the right side of the law, not us. But still, she had betrayed us, and nothing was so low as that. Frau Eberhardt says she first noticed your odd behavior in the week before school got out. Is that how long you've been tunneling? Yes, sir. There was no point in denying that. And how long until you expected to cross into the west? There's no way to know, Fritz said. We're not sure how much farther we have to go or what conditions we might encounter along the way. You're not the first to attempt an escape through tunnels, Mueller said. Why did you think you would succeed when nearly all attempts have failed? We didn't know if we'd get across, I said. We only knew that we had to try. But now with 2 shots of my gun, you will be nothing but failed escapees. Your bodies will be buried in shame. Your mother will be arrested and likely jailed, and your names will be published in every newspaper and throughout all history as traitors and cowards. We're neither, sir. Fritz held his head up, clearly determined that if Mueller was going to shoot us, it wouldn't be with us acting ashamed for what we had done. Our country is Germany, one country that should be reunited. We don't belong to Moscow or the West. We belong to ourselves, and I've never betrayed that. This tunnel has taken every ounce of courage we have. We're not cowards. That seemed to entertain Mueller. And so how would you have yourselves described? As heroes? Are you role models to other young people who are living behind the wall? We're a brother and sister who only want a chance for a better life, Fritz said. And to bring our family back together, I added. Please let us go. Forget you've seen us here. I'm a uniformed officer of the state and could no sooner forget that tunnel than forget my own name. His attention wandered upstairs as a gust of wind blew through the boards on the basement. It provided enough of a distraction that I wondered if Fritz and I could rush at him and overcome him and then, well, I didn't know what. We weren't murderers, and we couldn't hold him here. We didn't even have enough money to offer him a respectable bribe. But we did have a tunnel. Muller wore a gold wedding band on his left hand. He had a wife. On his left shoulder there was a small milk stain, from a burping baby, perhaps? He looked down into the tunnel again. Who else is coming with you? No one, I said. Half of East Germany could be lined up to come with us, and I'd still deny it. I wouldn't rat them out the way Frau Eberhardt had done to us. See, Goethe, she still wants to be trustworthy to her fellow citizens, even though other people have betrayed her. She doesn't want to be like Frau Eberhardt. She's just not that type of person. What if others wanted to come? Beside me, Fritz looked confused, perhaps wondering if that was a trap to get us to reveal other names, but I didn't think so. They'd be welcome, I said. You could. No, I couldn't. But from the tone of his voice, I knew Muller had already thought about it, maybe even before he came here. That's why he'd come alone. His eyes flicked back to the tunnel, then over to me. I'll go up the ladder first. You will follow next, and then your brother. If you try any tricks, I'll bury you here. He turned to leave, but I darted forward to grab his arm. Not to fight, but only to stop him from leaving. He reacted by shoving me to the ground and aiming his gun directly at me. I raised my hands in the air and closed my eyes tight, waiting for him to squeeze the trigger. Would you die for this tunnel? He yelled. Risk your lives, your family, for a run to the west? Don't shoot her, Fritz answered. This was my idea, not hers. I opened my eyes again to protest, but still felt paralyzed in the sights of his gun. It means she couldn't move. At least he hadn't fired it yet. With a trembling voice, I said, Bring your family and come with us. Bring them to the west. Miller's eyes widened. Escape? How dare you suggest? There's more for you and your family in the west. It's a life you would want for them if you could choose. Fritz caught on to my idea. You don't have to dig, but you might be able to keep other officers away from this area. Then, when we're ready to leave, we can put out a signal, letting you know that the tunnel is completed. Muller wasn't convinced, but at least he was thinking. My wife wants to go to America. She has family there. We need another couple of weeks, Fritz said. Maybe more if we run into problems, but I can promise with all my honor to give you the chance to come. For the first time, Muller lowered his gun. What's the signal, then? Do we trust Officer Muller? Do you think he really wants to escape? I spoke up. We'll leave a shovel in the dirt outside, a sign that we no longer need it. A long silence followed. Muller spent most of it staring into the tunnel, and I wondered if he was picturing himself and his family running to freedom. I'd done that plenty of times. Finally, he said, I will write in my report that I investigated and saw nothing suspicious, but I may return tomorrow to arrest you. I tried to catch Fritz's eye to see what we should do. Muller's terms were terrible. At best, he would do nothing to help, and at worst, he would get us killed. What other choice did we have, though? We had nothing else to bargain with. Fritz reached out a hand to shake Muller's, irritating me even more. He thanked Muller. He actually thanked him for agreeing not to kill us, yet. Muller turned to leave and then said, Whatever I decide, you must hurry. With or without my help, this tunnel will be discovered soon. If I come with the group who discovers you, I will shoot just as quickly as the others, so do not look to me for sympathy in that moment. All I can do is warn you now. Your biggest enemy is time. I wasn't sure about that. Right now, Muller seemed like a pretty big enemy to me. Fritz only nodded and said, We're going to escape, and your family is welcome when we do. Watch for the shovel outside. We'll cross that same night. Fritz and I went straight home afterward. Muller's visit had left both of us with legs of jelly, and nothing he had promised was very comforting. As far as I was concerned, wherever we went now, his gun was still pointed our way. Another dreaded reality to add to my growing list of worries. As we walked home, Fritz pointed out the good news that Muller would probably come with us for the escape. Otherwise, he could have just shot us there and earned himself a fine promotion for discovering that tunnel. I suppose that was how Fritz and my thinking had evolved. The fact that we hadn't been shot and left to die was the morbid way in which we cheered ourselves up. We passed by a bakery offering old bread for a single Ostmark. Fritz said we could spare that much and bought some for each of us, which we munched on as we walked. It was dry and wouldn't go very far in helping our hunger, but it was better than nothing. Frau Eberhardt was in front of our apartments as we approached, so Fritz and I crossed the street and pretended to look in the storefronts there until she went inside. We'd go to any extreme to avoid her in the future. It was a long night afterward for me. As tired as I felt, too much had happened that day, with Anna and what was surely the final cut in our friendship, the broken shovel, and then Officer Muller. If we had been found by anyone else, Fritz and I might be dead right now. Maybe that was still our fate. If Muller could figure out what we were doing, others could too. It was only a matter of time. By morning, though, I felt a little better. We shared the last of what little food was in the apartment and then reminded each other that a new shovel was more important than a full belly. After buying the shovel, we made our way to the welcome building. It looked just as it had the night before, but different to me somehow, because now our secret wasn't ours alone, and any safety I had felt in working on this quiet, unused road was gone. Fritz rubbed my head. Today will be better. I'm sure of it. I frowned back at him. There's a pit in my stomach. Have you guys had that feeling before, a pit in your stomach, when you just kind of feel like something's not right? Well, there's nothing in mine, so consider yourself lucky. I didn't like his joke, not at all. I'm serious, Fritz. Something bad is going to happen. It's only leftover worries from yesterday. Fritz stared at me a moment too long, as if trying to convince himself of his own words. Now let's get to work. Things went fine for a few hours. I was in the garden clearing more weeds and had already emptied out a lot of the dirt from the basement. But then I saw Fritz at the basement window, hissing at me to come inside and to hurry. His eyes were so wide I could see the whites from here. The reason for the pit in my gut. I dropped the spade and hurried for the building, careful not to make it look like anything was unusual, if anyone was watching. But when I ducked inside, Fritz had already returned to the shelter, and I breathlessly raced to follow. "What's the matter?" I called while descending the ladder. My answer came as soon as I entered the tunnel. Water trickled beneath my feet and sank into the soil, creating a dense mud. The farther I walked, the more water there was. At the back of the tunnel, Fritz had exposed a pipe that was now spurting out pressurized water like a fireman's hose. The hole in it wasn't large, but it was enough to cause significant damage and was getting worse. The streams of water tore dirt from the walls and sent it in chunks to the ground. Our tunnel was flooding, as if we didn't find a way to stop the water. And if we didn't find a way to stop the water, it would collapse entirely. "How did this happen?" I cried. I nicked it with a shovel. Didn't even know it was there until water shot out at me. What did we do? Fritz wrapped his hands around the pipe, which helped, but water leaked down his arms, and we knew it would burst as soon as he let go. Maybe even break open and flood the entire tunnel before we could escape. "I have an idea," he said, "but it'll take some time to get what we need. You have to stay here and hold this pipe." "How long? I can't—" "However long it takes. Come on, Goethe, you can do this." I stood up on tiptoes, then reached up and replaced my hands with his. The water pushed at me with a force I didn't expect, and it took effort to keep my grip on the pipe. "Hurry," I told him, "just hurry." He ran from the tunnel and left me in absolute darkness. A flashlight was somewhere at my feet, but already buried in mud, and I couldn't let go to search for it. The water dripping down my hands was cold, and the wetter I became, the more I shivered. Fritz said it would take him some time. How long did that mean? An hour? 2 hours? Until evening? I couldn't hold on until evening. With water still dripping from the pipe, I wasn't even sure if the tunnel would be here that long. If it collapsed, it'd take me with it. In the darkness, a chunk of dirt or maybe rock fell somewhere behind me. I instinctively ducked, protecting myself from whatever might fall next. It terrified me to wonder how much had just fallen, and if more was about to come down. The only thing I knew for sure was that the mud at my feet was getting deeper. Occasionally, when my hold slipped, water would spurt at harsh angles, inevitably bringing down more chunks of dirt. At one point, it loosened a rock overhead. I heard something start to fall and backed away from the sound, but when it came down, it grazed my arm. From the sting, I was sure it gave me a deep cut, though I couldn't remove my hands from the pipe to check it. It wasn't much longer before I was entirely soaked through. My wet clothes clung to my body, my feet were sinking in mud, and my hair was in my face and over my eyes, but I suppose it didn't matter because there was nothing I could see in here anyway. I was shivering and my fingers and toes were already numb, but I knew if I let go of the pipe, everything we worked so hard for was finished. So I held on, doing whatever I could to distract myself. I solved long division problems, recited poems, and prayed for stronger willpower, meaning if you have willpower, you can stick with something, you can make yourself do it. Though it'd be the last trait my mother would want me to strengthen. When those didn't work, I sang songs in my head. Ironically, the only ones I could think of were the patriotic songs of the pioneers, but their rousing tunes didn't help for long. Time was crawling by, and I'd lost any sense of how long Fritz had been gone. Was it an hour? Was it more? He would come back, I was sure of that, unless he had been arrested for some reason. Maybe Frau Eberhard had caused us trouble again. She was obviously capable of it. Or what if the tunnel was already collapsing from the outside? Maybe that's why it was so dark in here, and why he hadn't come back. Maybe he couldn't. That terrified me, and I tried to shake the worst thoughts from my mind. All I knew was that Fritz had said to hold on, so I held to the pipe and to my senses and to my courage, bundling them together and knotting them within my heart. I closed my eyes and repeated his last words to me. Come on, Goethe, you can do this. Fritz did return eventually. I wasn't sure it was him at first, not until I heard his voice calling for me. Where's the flashlight? He asked. Somewhere below me, it fell. Fritz dug for that first, and when the light finally returned to the tunnel, I began breathing easier. He was fine, and I would be after a while. But for now I was exhausted and freezing, and my numb hands ached from the pressure and the cold. I'd held them up for so long I doubted any blood was left in them. What happened to your arm? He asked. With the light on it, I saw the cut was much worse than I had expected. It ran in a long, jagged line that would probably leave a scar and stung like it had been attacked by wasps, but at least it wasn't bleeding anymore. I shrugged it off and asked, what do you have for the pipe? Not much, but it'll do. Fritz held up a clamp and an empty bicycle tube. Papa once fixed a pipe in our apartment this way. It's not permanent, but it will work for now. Where'd you get those? The clamp came from Herr Kraus. He had a few people at his place for some sort of meeting, so he told me to go in his back room and take what I needed from his gadget collection. Didn't ask any other questions. The bicycle tube came from Claudia. She has extras in the shop where she works, and I hoped she wouldn't ask questions either. Claudia? Your girlfriend? Ex-girlfriend, remember? Now move your hand. It's going to spurt water, but I've got to wrap this tube around the leak. I obeyed and caught a powerful spray of water to my face before Fritz got the tube over it. But he pulled it tight and then began wrapping it around the pipe. With every layer, the water sealed up tighter. Hand me the clamp, he said. It's in my back pocket. I grabbed the clamp, and while he worked to get it pinched around the pipe, I said, what do you mean you hoped Claudia wouldn't ask questions? Did she? He paused for only a moment and said, I went into her shop filthy and wet, and you and I are both thinner than we ought to be right now. Yeah, she had questions. What did you tell her? Only about the garden. I said I fell into the pond and that we needed the bicycle tube to prop up some plants. And did she believe you? Fritz finished sealing the clamp and then patted at the pipe. When he was convinced the leak was fixed, he glanced down at me and said, probably not, but she used to like me. I hope it'll be okay. Are you kind of noticing the same thing that I am, which is like the more people they have to trust and tell things, the riskier the tunnel becomes? That wasn't good enough, not after all our other close calls. But as things became more dangerous, simply hoping for anything good was probably the best we could do.